A pristine mansion hides the painful silence of a woman trapped by her own fragility. When her son travels, his new wife reveals her dark side, turning care into cruelty. But an unexpected return will change everything, and the truth will come out like a scream that has been muffled for far too long. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's get into it. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of the Upper East Side mansion, illuminating every corner of a space that looked like it was pulled from a design magazine. The flawless white walls contrasted with the vibrant green of the meticulously kept gardens, where red roses and jasmine scented the air with a soft, enchanting fragrance. Everything there breathed luxury, comfort, and the appearance of a perfect life that could fool anyone who passed through the property's imposing gates. But perfection, as is so often the case, was only skin deep. Behind the silk curtains and imported furniture, there were stories that couldn't fit into any photograph. There was pain that couldn't be decorated, guilt that couldn't be bought, and secrets that waited patiently for the right moment to surface. Helen was sitting in her wheelchair on the back patio, watching the birds that visited the garden every morning. At 72, she still possessed the natural elegance that had been with her since her youth. Her grey hair was tied in a low bun, and her brown eyes, despite the weariness they carried, still shone with a particular light when something pleased her. She wore a beige linen outfit, simple but refined, chosen with the care of someone who had always valued her appearance even on the most difficult days. The accident that had left her in this condition had happened 3 years earlier, on an ordinary afternoon that became the turning point of her existence. A simple fall down the stairs, a misstep, and everything changed. The legs that had carried her down so many paths no longer responded as they once had. The freedom to come and go had become a privilege of the past, replaced by a dependence she had never imagined she would face. Michael, her only son, carried that day like a stone in his chest. He had been traveling for business when the accident occurred, closing an important deal in another state when he received the call that would change everything. The guilt of not having been there at that crucial moment had never left him. Since then, he had tried to compensate for his absence in every way possible. Private doctors, renowned physical therapists, state-of-the-art equipment, a complete renovation of the house to make it more accessible. But none of it eased the weight he felt in his heart every time he looked at his mother. Their relationship had always been very close. Helen had raised Michael alone after his father left when the boy was just 8 years old. She had worked hard, made sacrifices Michael only understood when he became an adult, and raised him with love, firmness, and values he carried to this day. Now at 45, Michael was a successful entrepreneur, owner of a chain of electronics stores that spanned several states. He had built an empire from scratch, driven by the determination his mother had taught him and the desire to give her the comfortable life she deserved. But professional success came at a price. The constant travel, the endless meetings, the commitments that couldn't be postponed. Michael spent weeks away from home, managing businesses in New York, Miami, Washington, D.C., and Chicago. And although he ensured his mother had everything she needed materially, he knew his presence was irreplaceable. Rosa entered the patio carrying a tray with Helen's breakfast. She was a 53-year-old woman with a motherly demeanor and a smile that could calm any room. Hailing from a small town in West Virginia, Rosa had been working for the family for almost 10 years, since well before the accident. She had started as a housekeeper, but over time she had become much more than that. She was a confidant, a companion, sometimes almost a sister to Helen. "Good morning, Miss Helen," Rosa said, placing the tray on the small table next to the wheelchair. "I brought your favorite fruits today. The papaya looked beautiful at the market." Helen smiled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Rosa. You always know how to brighten my day." The two women chatted while Helen had her breakfast, talking about small things, about the weather, about the neighborhood news Rosa brought back from the market. It was a simple routine, but one that brought some comfort amidst the monotony of days that always felt the same. "Miss Helen," Rosa began with some hesitation, "Mr. Michael called earlier. He said he's arriving tonight and has some important news to share." Helen raised her eyebrows, curious. News? Did he say what it was? Rosa shook her head. He just said he wanted to tell you in person, but from the sound of his voice it seemed like something good. The day passed slowly, as it usually did. Helen had her physical therapy sessions with the professional who came 3 times a week, read a few pages of the novel on her nightstand, and watched the afternoon news. But her mind was restless, curious about what news Michael would bring. When the clock struck 7 in the evening, the sound of a car in the driveway announced his arrival. Helen felt her heart quicken, as it always did when her son came home. Michael walked through the front door with that wide smile that lit up his face, but this time there was something different in his eyes. A special sparkle, an excitement Helen hadn't seen in a long time. "Mom," he said, crossing the living room quickly to hug her. "I've missed you so much." Helen returned the hug, taking in her son's familiar scent, that mix of expensive cologne and coffee that always accompanied him. "My son, it's so good to see you. Rosa said you have news." Michael pulled up a chair and sat in front of her, holding her hands gently. His eyes danced with anticipation. "I do, Mom. News that's going to change our lives. I met someone." Helen blinked, processing the information. "Someone? An incredible woman, Mom. Her name is Olivia. We met 6 months ago at a tech conference in Miami. She works in digital marketing. She's smart, funny, caring. And Mom, I'm in love for the first time in a long time. I feel truly happy." Helen's heart tightened with mixed emotions. Joy at seeing her son so radiant, but also a pang of apprehension. Michael had been so focused on work in recent years that he barely had time for relationships. That he was in love was wonderful, but the speed at which everything seemed to be happening made her a little nervous. "That's wonderful, my son," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I'm happy for you. And when do I get to meet her?" Michael's smile grew even wider. "Actually, she's here. She came with me. She's outside, a little nervous. I wanted to ask your permission before bringing her in." Helen took a deep breath. "Of course, sweetheart. Bring her in. I want to meet this woman who's captured my son's heart." Michael stood up quickly and went out the front door. Helen instinctively fixed her hair, smoothed her skirt, and tried to calm her nerves. Rosa appeared from the kitchen, also curious, and stood nearby, discreet but attentive. When Michael returned, he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a fairy tale. Olivia was truly beautiful. She was around 35, with long, wavy brown hair that fell over her shoulders, green eyes that sparkled under the chandelier's light, and a smile that lit up the room. She wore an elegant but not ostentatious navy blue dress and moved with a natural grace that commanded attention without seeming forced. "Mum," Michael introduced with evident pride, "this is Olivia." Olivia approached Helen with soft steps, knelt beside the wheelchair to be at eye level, and took her hands gently. "Ms. Helen, it's an honor to finally meet you. Michael talked so much about you that I feel like I already know you." Her voice was melodious, warm, genuinely affectionate. Helen felt herself immediately drawn in by her presence. "The pleasure is all mine, dear. Michael just told me about you two. Welcome to our home." Olivia smiled, and there were tears in the corners of her eyes. "Thank you. I was so nervous to meet you. I wanted so badly to make a good impression. And you have," Helen assured her, feeling her defenses lower. There was something genuine about this woman, a sweetness that seemed real. In the days that followed, Olivia became a constant presence in the mansion. She wasn't living there yet, but she came over every day, bringing flowers, talking with Helen for hours, showing a genuine interest in her life, her stories, her memories. She listened intently when Helen spoke about the past, about raising Michael alone, about the challenges she had faced, about the dreams she had realized, and those that had been left behind. Olivia also proved to be considerate of Rosa, treating her with respect and kindness, something Helen deeply appreciated. She helped in the kitchen, insisted on making afternoon tea, and brought new recipes she had learned. She seemed truly interested in becoming part of the family. Michael was ecstatic. Helen hadn't seen him this happy in years. He laughed more, was more light-hearted, more present. It seemed as if Olivia had brought back a part of him that had been lost amidst work and responsibilities. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after meeting Olivia, Helen was alone with her in the living room. Michael had left for a quick meeting and Rosa was in the back of the house doing laundry. Olivia sat on the sofa next to Helen's wheelchair and took her hand. "Miss Helen," she began in a soft voice, "I wanted to talk to you about something important." Helen turned to her, attentive. "You can tell me anything, dear." Olivia took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "I know we've only known each other for a short time, but you need to know that I've fallen deeply in love with Michael. He's the most wonderful man I've ever met. And part of that is because of you, because of how you raised him, the values you taught him." Helen felt her heart warm. "Thank you, Olivia. That means so much to me," Olivia continued, her green eyes fixed on Helen's. "And I've fallen in love with you too. I know that might sound strange to say, but it's true. You remind me of my own mother, who I lost a few years ago. And I would like, if you'll allow me, to take care of you as I would have cared for my own mother." The words touched Helen deeply. She had never had a daughter, had always wished for one, and here was this beautiful, sweet young woman offering exactly that. "Dear, what a beautiful thing to say. Of course you can. It would be an honor to have you as part of our family." Olivia hugged Helen carefully, and Helen could feel the warm tears running down the young woman's face. In that moment, all of her initial apprehensions vanished completely. How could she ever distrust someone so genuinely caring? 2 weeks later, Michael came home with an air of nervousness mixed with euphoria. He asked Helen and Rosa to sit down as he had an important announcement to make. Olivia was by his side, their hands intertwined, and both had radiant smiles. "Mum Rosa," Michael began, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "I asked Olivia to marry me, and she said yes." Helen felt her heart race. Marriage? So soon? But when she looked at her son, at the happiness etched on his face, at the sparkle in his eyes, she couldn't feel anything but joy. If this was his choice, she would support it. "My son, what wonderful news," Helen said, extending her arms. "Come here, you two." Michael and Olivia approached, and Helen hugged them both tightly. Rosa, watching from the kitchen doorway, had tears in her eyes and applauded discreetly. "Congratulations, Mr. Michael, Miss Olivia. May God bless this marriage." Olivia knelt again before Helen. "Miss Helen, I promise to take care of your son, and I promise to take care of you too. You will never be alone again. I'll be here always." And Helen believed her. With all her heart, she believed her. The wedding was set for 2 months later, an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden with only close friends and a few distant relatives. Olivia insisted she didn't want anything big or ostentatious, that what mattered was their union and the presence of the people who truly mattered. Helen found this lovely, another testament to her daughter-in-law's character. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with preparations and joy. Olivia spent more time at the house, helping Helen with small things, talking about their plans for the future, about how wonderful it would be to have a united family. She spoke of wanting to have children one day, about how wonderful it would be for Helen to have grandchildren to fill the house with life and joy. Helen found herself daydreaming. After years of relative loneliness, with only Michael and Rosa as family, the prospect of having a daughter, of having grandchildren, of seeing the house full of love again, was comforting and exciting. Rosa, however, maintained a quiet reservation. It wasn't that she disliked Olivia. The young woman was polite and kind to her, but something bothered her. Maybe it was just a natural jealousy of seeing another woman take up space in Helen and Michael's lives. Maybe it was intuition. She couldn't say. But she kept her eyes open, observing, paying attention to small details that no one else seemed to notice. The wedding day arrived sunny and warm, typical of a New York summer. The garden was decorated with white flowers and delicate arrangements. A small altar was set up under a pergola covered in jasmine, and white chairs were arranged in a semicircle. Helen was in the front row, wearing a light blue silk outfit that Olivia had personally chosen for her. Rosa had spent the entire day helping with the preparations, ensuring everything was perfect. When the music began and Olivia appeared at the far end of the garden, there was a collective gasp. She was stunning in a simple but elegant white dress, her hair down with a crown of natural flowers, carrying a bouquet of white roses. She walked down the aisle alone. She had no family to accompany her, and when she reached the altar, before climbing the steps, she detoured to Helen. In front of all the guests, Olivia knelt beside the wheelchair and held Helen's hands. "Ms. Helen," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I wanted to ask for your blessing. You are the mother of the man I love, and I would like to have your approval before I marry him." Helen was crying openly. "You have my blessing, my daughter, and my love. Be very happy." Olivia kissed Helen's forehead, hugged her briefly, and then walked to the altar, where Michael was waiting with teary eyes. The ceremony was beautiful, emotional, and when the officiant declared them husband and wife, Helen felt that a new chapter was beginning for all of them. A chapter of unity, of family, of love. The reception that followed was cheerful and relaxed. There was music, delicious food prepared by a caterer hired especially for the occasion, laughter and lively conversation. Olivia didn't leave Helen's side the whole time, making sure she was comfortable, that she had everything she needed, introducing her to the few friends she had invited. As night fell and the guests began to leave, Michael and Olivia went up to the room that would now be theirs, Michael's old room that had been renovated and redecorated. Rosa helped Helen get ready for bed, taking her to her ground floor room, assisting with her nightly routine. "Are you happy, Miss Helen?" Rosa asked while brushing her employer's hair. Helen smiled, looking at her own reflection in the mirror. "I am, Rosa, very happy. We finally have a complete family again." Rosa nodded, but her gaze in the mirror betrayed a concern she couldn't name. "May God bless us all," she murmured. That night, Helen slept soundly, dreaming of a future full of promise. She had no way of knowing that these were the last moments of peace she would have for a long time. She couldn't imagine that the woman she had just gained as a daughter held dark secrets behind that perfect smile. She couldn't foresee that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The first month after the wedding passed in apparent harmony. Olivia naturally assumed the role of lady of the house, organizing routines, supervising the staff, and taking care of details that had previously been Rosa's responsibility. She was efficient, attentive, and seemed genuinely happy in her new role. With Michael, she was the perfect wife, attentive, affectionate, always ready to support him in his professional decisions. He seemed more relaxed, more present, sharing his worries with her in a way he never had with anyone before. With Helen, Olivia maintained that initial sweetness. She spent hours talking with her, helping with her physical therapy exercises, reading to her when Helen was tired. She brought small gifts, fresh flowers, special chocolates. She seemed committed to winning not only the love, but also the complete trust of her mother-in-law. But Rosa, with her years of experience and sharp instincts, began to notice small changes. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but they were there. The way Olivia spoke to her when Michael wasn't around was slightly different, less warm, more businesslike. The way she had reorganized the kitchen without consulting anyone, how she had moved Helen's medications without telling her. Small things that individually meant nothing, but together formed a pattern Rosa couldn't ignore. One afternoon, while Rosa was helping Helen with lunch, the door opened and Olivia entered with a serious expression. "Miss Helen, I need to talk to you about something important." Helen looked at her, surprised by her tone. "Of course, dear, what is it?" Olivia sat beside her, her posture rigid. "It's about your diet. I spoke with Michael's doctor, a specialist in geriatrics, and he said we need to make some changes to your meals. Things with less salt, less sugar, lighter foods." Helen frowned. "But I already follow a balanced diet. The nutritionist Michael hired made a specific plan for me." Olivia smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, but this doctor is more up to date. He knows the latest research. And as your daughter-in-law, it's my responsibility to ensure you're in the best possible health." Rosa, who was near the door, felt a growing unease. "Miss Olivia, if I may, Perhaps it would be better to consult Dr. Evans, who has been seeing Miss Helen for years, before making any changes. Olivia turned to Rosa, and for a fraction of a second her face changed. There was a flash of irritation, of something cold and hard before it returned to its lovely expression. "Rosa, I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter. I'm sure you have other things to do." The tone was polite, but there was something in it that made Rosa back away. She looked at Helen, who seemed confused, and then left the room, but she stood just outside the door listening. "Miss Helen," Olivia continued, her voice returning to that customary sweetness, "I only want what's best for you. Trust me, I'll take care of everything. You don't need to worry about a thing." Helen, still a bit unsettled, nodded slowly. "All right, dear, if you think it's for the best." Olivia smiled, kissed Helen's forehead, and left the room. When she passed Rosa in the hallway, she didn't even look at her. Rosa stood there, her heart heavy, a bad feeling settling in her chest. Something had changed. Something was wrong. She couldn't say exactly what, but her instincts were screaming that she needed to be vigilant. The mask had slipped for a moment, just a brief moment, but it was enough for Rosa to see what was underneath, and what she had seen had terrified her. The following days brought changes that started almost imperceptibly, but gradually became more and more evident to anyone who knew where to look. Rosa watched everything with growing apprehension, unsure of what to do with what she was seeing. To speak up would be to accuse without proof. To stay silent would be to collude with something her instincts told her was wrong. She found herself trapped in a moral dilemma that kept her awake at night, turning thoughts over in her tired mind. The first concrete change came in Helen's diet. Olivia, fulfilling her promise to implement a new meal plan, began to personally supervise every meal. What was once varied and flavorful became restricted and bland. Portions shrank considerably, always with the justification that it was better for the health of a 72-year-old woman. The spices that gave flavor to Rosa's cooking were replaced with salt-free, sugar-free versions with practically nothing that made the food appetizing. "Miss Helen," Olivia would say in that sweet voice whenever Helen complained about the tasteless food, "I know it's hard to get used to, but it's for your own good." The doctor was very clear about the risks of an improper diet at your age. "We need to think about your long-term health." Helen, who had always been a polite woman who avoided conflict, accepted the explanations without much question. After all, Olivia was her daughter-in-law, married to Michael. She surely had the best intentions. But Rosa noticed how Helen pushed the food around on her plate, how her eyes lost their sparkle at the sight of meals that once brought her pleasure, transformed into tasteless obligations. Rosa discreetly tried to compensate. When Olivia wasn't around, she would bring Helen little treats, a piece of cake left over from the afternoon snack, a sweeter fruit, a homemade cookie. Small acts of silent rebellion that were received with gratitude by Helen, but which Rosa knew weren't enough to make up for the radical change in her diet. Michael, absorbed in his business and his new married life, didn't seem to notice the changes. He traveled frequently, sometimes for a week or more, and when he was home, Olivia was so attentive to him that any concern that might arise was quickly dispelled. She was the perfect wife, always smiling, always understanding, always supporting his professional decisions. One morning, about 6 weeks after the wedding, Michael announced at breakfast that he had to travel to the southeast for 10 days. It was a major business expansion, the opening of 3 new stores in Atlanta, and his presence was essential. Helen felt a pang of apprehension hearing this. 10 days was a long time, the longest Michael would be away since Olivia had arrived. "Don't worry, Mum," he said, kissing her forehead before leaving for the airport. "Olivia will take great care of you, and I'll call every day. If you need anything, just let me know." Helen forced a smile and waved as he drove away. Olivia was beside her, a hand resting on Helen's shoulder with a pressure that seemed, for the first time, a little too firm to be merely affectionate. "Don't you worry, Miss Helen," Olivia said, as Michael's car disappeared through the gate. "We'll be just fine here, just the 2 of us." There was something in her tone that made Helen shiver, but she pushed the feeling away. It was silly, she thought. Olivia was her daughter-in-law, her daughter of the heart. There was no reason for suspicion, but once Michael left, it was. as if a curtain had fallen. Olivia wasn't openly rude or aggressive. No, she was too smart for that. Her changes were subtle, calculated, designed to be unnoticeable to anyone not paying close attention. The long, affectionate conversations ceased. Olivia now entered Helen's room only to deal with practical matters. "We need to adjust your medication schedule. I'm going to reorganize your closet. You don't need to get out of bed today, it's too cold outside." Each sentence was spoken politely, but there was a new coldness, a distance that hadn't existed before. Helen felt the change but didn't know how to name it. Maybe Olivia was just stressed with her new responsibilities, she thought. Maybe it was just an adjustment period. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something was wrong. Rosa, for her part, was increasingly alarmed. She saw how Olivia controlled every aspect of Helen's life. The visits Helen used to receive from old friends were quietly discouraged. Olivia would call them, saying Helen wasn't feeling well, that she preferred to rest, that maybe it was better to reschedule. And she would reschedule for dates further and further away, until the calls simply stopped. The walks in the garden, which were an essential part of Helen's routine, became increasingly rare. "It's too hot," Olivia would say. "It's too cold. It's going to rain." There was always an excuse, always delivered with apparent concern, but the result was the same. Helen became more and more confined to her room, isolated from the outside world. Rosa tried to intervene once. It was one afternoon when she found Olivia in the library, looking through papers that appeared to be financial documents. "Miss Olivia," she began carefully, "I've noticed Miss Helen hasn't been getting out much. Don't you think it would be good for her to get some fresh air?" Olivia looked up from the papers and her gaze was icy. "Rosa, I appreciate your concern, but as I've said before, family matters are between me and Michael. You are the housekeeper. Your job is to clean, cook, and do as I say. Understood?" The tone was harsh, final, with no trace of the sweetness Olivia showed in front of Michael and Helen. Rosa felt her blood run cold. "Yes, ma'am, I understand," she replied, lowering her eyes. "Good. And one more thing, Rosa," Olivia continued, turning her attention back to the papers. "I know you have a habit of sneaking food to Miss Helen. That stops now. Her diet is strict for medical reasons. If I find out you're sabotaging her treatment, I will have to take action. And you know how much your children depend on your salary, don't you?" The threat was clear, though veiled. Rosa had 3 children, 2 in school and 1 in college. The salary she earned was vital to supporting her family. Losing her job would be devastating. She nodded silently and left the library with a heavy heart. That night, alone in her small room at the back of the mansion, Rosa cried. She cried out of frustration, fear, and helplessness. She knew something terrible was happening, but she had no way to prove it. And even if she did, what could she do? Confront Olivia and risk losing everything? Call Michael and be called crazy, jealous, a troublemaker? He was in love, blinded by it. Would he believe his perfect wife or the housekeeper who worked for him? Meanwhile, in the master suite, Helen was also awake. She stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what was happening. Why did she feel so tired lately? Why did Olivia, who was once so affectionate, now barely spend a few minutes with her? Why did she feel so alone in a house full of people? She thought about calling Michael, but what would she say? That his daughter-in-law wasn't as nice anymore, that the food was bland. They would sound like petty, childish complaints. Michael was happy, working hard. She didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to spoil her son's happiness with grievances that might just be a product of her imagination or her old age. The days dragged on. Michael called every night as promised, but the conversations were brief. He was tired, had early meetings the next day, and Olivia was always there, taking the phone to talk to him afterward, laughing in that melodious way, saying everything was perfect, that Helen was fine, that there was nothing to worry about. And when Helen tried to mention something, some discomfort, some need, Olivia was always nearby, with that warning look Helen had learned to recognize. "Your mother is just tired, Michael," Olivia would say into the phone. "We talked earlier. She asked me not to worry you with silly things. You know how it is, at her age she gets a little confused sometimes." Confused, the word echoed in Helen's mind. Was she really confused? Was she imagining things? The doubt planted by Olivia grew like a weed in her mind, making her question her own perceptions. Rosa watched everything powerless. She saw Helen wasting away, getting thinner, paler, quieter. Her eyes, which once shone with life, now seemed dull. But Rosa was trapped by need, by fear, by the feeling that nothing she did would make a difference. One afternoon, on about the 8th day of Michael's trip, something happened that would change everything. Helen was in her room lying in bed because Olivia had said she shouldn't tire herself out when she heard voices in the hallway. It was Olivia talking on the phone, but not to Michael. Her voice was different, harder, more real. "Yes, I know it's risky," Olivia was saying, "but I need to speed things up. She's still too lucid. I need her to become more dependent, more confused. No, I'm not going to do anything obvious. I'm smarter than that. I just need more time without Michael around." Helen felt the blood freeze in her veins. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure it could be heard. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't confused. Olivia was plotting something terrible, and she was at the center of it. When the voice faded and silence returned, Helen lay motionless in bed, processing what she had just heard. The fear she felt was visceral, primal. She was in danger, real, tangible danger, and she was trapped, unable to escape, dependent on a woman who clearly wished her harm. Her hands were trembling when she finally managed to reach the phone on her nightstand. She had to call Michael, tell him everything, ask for help, but when she picked up the receiver, there was no dial tone. The line was dead. Panic began to take over. Had Olivia cut the line, or was it just a coincidence? Helen tried to calm herself, to breathe deeply, to think rationally, but it was hard when the fear was so immense. The door opened suddenly, and Olivia walked in with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Helen, what a surprise to see you awake. I thought you'd be asleep by now." Helen tried to control her voice. "I need to call Michael. The phone isn't working." Olivia approached the bed, her presence seeming to fill the entire room. "Oh, really? How strange. I'll have someone check on that tomorrow. But for now, it's time to take your medicine and get some rest." She held out a small cup of water and several pills. Helen looked at them with suspicion. How many pills were there? She didn't remember taking so many before. "Olivia, I don't remember taking all of these." Olivia's smile tightened. "Ms. Helen, these are the vitamins and supplements the doctor prescribed. You really are getting forgetful, aren't you? Maybe it's time we talk to Michael about this when he gets back." The implicit threat was clear. If Helen caused trouble, Olivia would paint her as a senile, confused old woman who no longer knew what she was doing. And Michael, in love with his wife, would probably believe her. With trembling hands, Helen took the pills and put them in her mouth, but she didn't swallow. She waited for Olivia to leave the room, then spit them all into a tissue, hiding it under her pillow. Her heart was still racing. But she had won a small victory. That night, Helen didn't sleep. She lay awake, planning, thinking. She needed a plan. She needed to find a way to protect herself, to alert someone to what was happening. But how could she do that when she was trapped in this room, isolated, with Olivia controlling every aspect of her life? The next day, when Rosa came in to clean the room, Helen waited until she was sure Olivia was far away. "Rosa," she whispered, her hand closing on the housekeeper's arm. "Please, I need your help." Rosa looked at her surprised. The expression on Helen's face was one of genuine desperation. "Miss Helen, what is it?" Helen told her, in a low, rapid voice, what she had overheard, her suspicions, the dead phone, the pills that seemed like too many. Rosa listened with growing horror, because everything Helen said confirmed her worst fears. "I believe you," Rosa said, squeezing Helen's hand, "but I don't know what I can do. If I say anything, she'll fire me. And without proof, no one will believe us." "I know, Rosa, I know, but at least now I know I'm not crazy, that I'm not imagining things." The two women stood there holding hands, two fragile lives united by a dangerous secret, unaware that the worst was yet to come. When Michael finally returned from his trip 2 days later, he was greeted by Olivia's radiant smile and an impeccably tidy house. He was tired but happy to be back. Olivia hugged him enthusiastically, cooked his favorite dinner, and made everything seem perfect. When Michael went to visit Helen, he found her in bed, thinner than he remembered, with dark circles under her eyes. "Mum, what happened? You don't look well." Helen looked at him, and then at Olivia, who was standing in the doorway with that gentle smile. She saw the warning in her daughter-in-law's green eyes. "I'm just tired, my son. You know, old age." Michael frowned. "Olivia, my mother looks very different. What happened while I was away?" Olivia sighed dramatically. "Michael, I've been trying not to worry you, but your mother has been having some episodes. Mental confusion, forgetfulness. Yesterday she couldn't remember if she'd had breakfast, even though I brought it to her myself. I think we need to consider talking to a specialized geriatrician." "Lies!" Helen wanted to scream. "It's all lies." But when she opened her mouth to object, the words wouldn't come out. What would she say? How could she explain without sounding exactly like Olivia was painting her, a confused, paranoid old woman? Michael came closer and held her hand. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were feeling this way?" "Because I'm not, Michael. Please believe me." But the words came out weak, unconvincing, because Helen was exhausted and frightened. Michael looked at Olivia, then back at Helen. "I'm going to make an appointment with the best geriatrician in New York. We'll find out what's going on and take care of it, okay?" Helen nodded, defeated. Olivia had won this round, and from the triumphant look she shot Helen as Michael turned his back, they both knew it. Rosa, watching from the doorway, felt tears roll down her face. She was witnessing a terrible injustice, and there was nothing she could do without putting herself and her family at risk. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Helen looked out her bedroom window at the moonlit garden. The roses that once brought her so much joy now seemed like silent witnesses to her anguish. She wondered how much longer she could hold on, how much longer before Olivia got whatever it was she was planning. And in another room of the mansion, Olivia smiled to herself as she reviewed documents. Everything was going according to plan. She just needed to be patient, careful, meticulous. Michael was rich, very rich, and all she needed was to remove the one obstacle between her and that fortune. An old woman in a wheelchair, frail and increasingly isolated. It would be almost too easy. What Olivia didn't know was that both Helen and Rosa, each in her own way, had decided to fight. No matter the cost, no matter the risk, they would not surrender without a fight, and sometimes courage doesn't come from strength, but from desperation. And sometimes the people who are underestimated are the most dangerous because they have nothing left to lose. The silent war had begun, and only time would tell who would emerge victorious. The days following Michael's return were marked by a tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. Helen felt more and more like a prisoner in her own home, watching every move, weighing every word before she spoke. The appointment with the geriatrician was scheduled for 2 weeks away, and she knew it could be her final sentence. If the doctor diagnosed some kind of cognitive decline, Olivia would have all the tools she needed to isolate her completely. Rosa, for her part, lived in a constant state of alert. She had decided that regardless of the personal risk, she had to do something. She began discreetly documenting everything she saw. In a small notebook, she wrote down the times of Helen's meals, what she ate, how Olivia behaved when Michael wasn't present. They were simple records, but they could serve as proof if the right moment came. Michael, absorbed in a new phase of business expansion, remained oblivious to the silent war unfolding under his roof. To him, Olivia was still the perfect, attentive, and dedicated wife. And his mother, well, she seemed to be getting older, more fragile, more confused. It was hard to accept, but it was the natural reality of life, or so he believed. One morning, about a week after Michael's return, Olivia entered Helen's room with a serious expression. She was accompanied by 2 men Helen had never seen before. They were young, strong, and dressed in the uniforms of a construction company. "Miss Helen," Olivia announced in that tone of voice that feigned concern but carried command, "we have a problem. The contractor's engineer came to do a routine inspection and discovered a leak in the walls of your room. It's serious, it could compromise the structure. We're going to need to do an urgent renovation." Helen's heart raced. A leak? She looked around the room, at the flawless white walls. There was no sign of moisture, no stain, no hint of a structural problem. Olivia, I don't see anything wrong with the walls. Olivia sighed with forced patience. That's why we need professionals, Miss Helen. Structural problems aren't always visible to the naked eye. But don't worry, I've already arranged a solution. We're going to move you temporarily to another room while we make the necessary repairs. Temporarily to where? Helen asked, her voice trembling slightly. To the room downstairs, the one near the pantry. I know it's not ideal, but it's only for a few weeks. As soon as the renovation is done, you'll be back here. Helen knew that room. It was small, dark, and poorly ventilated. It was in a part of the house that was rarely used, isolated from the main living areas. The thought of being moved there filled her with dread. No, she said with more firmness than she intended. I don't want to go to that room. We can wait for Michael to get back and discuss this with him. Olivia's face hardened for a split second before returning to its expression of concern. Miss Helen, Michael is in an important all-day meeting in Stamford. We can't wait. The situation is urgent. The longer we wait, the greater the risk of the wall collapsing. She motioned to the two men, who began unceremoniously gathering Helen's things. Helen felt powerless, watching her belongings being packed into boxes, her personal items handled without care. Please, she tried again, her voice weaker now. At least let me talk to my son. Olivia approached the wheelchair, bending down to be at Helen's eye level. Her voice was low, just for the two of them to hear. Miss Helen, the more you resist, the more it proves you're having trouble understanding. Michael is already worried about your mental health. Don't you think it's better to cooperate and show that you're still lucid? The threat was clear. Helen swallowed hard and nodded, defeated. Rosa, who had entered the room upon hearing the noise, froze in the doorway when she saw what was happening. Ms. Olivia, what's going on here? Olivia turned to her with a cold smile. Rosa, haven't we already discussed you meddling in family affairs? Ms. Helen is being temporarily relocated for safety reasons. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lot to do. Rosa looked at Helen, who had tears in her eyes, and felt her own helplessness like a weight in her chest. She couldn't do anything right then, not without making things worse. All she could do was follow as they took Helen to the new room. The so-called room near the pantry was even worse than Helen remembered. The windows were small and high, letting in little natural light. The air was damp and heavy, and there was a musty smell that permeated everything. The bed was old, the mattress lumpy, and there was much less space to maneuver the wheelchair. There was no television, no bookshelf, none of the small comforts that made her old room bearable. Here we are, Olivia said, watching the men place the last boxes in the corner. Temporary, remember. You'll be back in your room soon. But something in her tone, in the way she looked around with barely concealed satisfaction, told Helen that this was not temporary. This was permanent. This was a prison. After everyone left, Helen was alone in the claustrophobic space. She tried to reach the window with her wheelchair, but the space was too tight. She tried to turn on the light, but the bulb was dim and flickered intermittently. Despair began to set in, and for the first time since it all began, Helen cried. She cried for the loss of her freedom, for the betrayal of someone she had trusted, for her son's blindness, for the helplessness of her condition. Rosa, who had been standing outside the door, heard the crying and felt her heart break. She had to do something, anything. But what? Call Michael, and say what exactly? That his wife had moved his mother to a different room. Without context, without proof, it would sound like a trivial complaint. Over the next few days, Helen's situation deteriorated rapidly. Olivia now barely disguised her cruelty. Meals were irregular and scarce. Sometimes Helen would wait for hours for food that never came. When it did arrive, it was always insufficient and tasteless. Access to the bathroom was restricted, forcing Helen to use adult diapers, a humiliation that made her feel less human with each passing day. Rosa tried to help whenever she could, bringing fresh water, a piece of bread, a sweater when it was cold. But Olivia was always watching, always present, and she punished any gesture of kindness from Rosa with veiled threats about her job, about her children's future. Michael, when he was Home was kept away from that part of the house. Olivia always had an excuse. Your mother is resting. She had a rough night. The doctor recommended less stimulation. And he, trusting his wife, accepted the explanations without question. One evening, about 10 days after Helen's forced move, Michael came home earlier than expected. He had finished his appointments quickly and decided to surprise Olivia with a romantic dinner. But when he walked through the door, the house was strangely quiet. "Olivia," he called out, leaving his briefcase in the entryway. "Honey, I'm home." There was no answer. He went upstairs to the bedroom they shared, but it was empty. He came back down, walked through the living room, the kitchen. That's when he heard a faint sound coming from the back of the house, near the pantry. A weak voice, almost a whisper, calling his name. "Mom?" he said aloud, following the sound. "Mom? Where are you?" He came to a door he rarely opened, the one that led to the old guest room they never used. When he turned the knob and pushed it open, what he saw made him freeze in place. Helen was there, in a wheelchair in the middle of that dark, damp room, so thin and pale she barely looked like the same person. Her clothes were dirty, her hair disheveled. The environment around her was degrading, lacking dignity, lacking basic care. "Oh my God," Michael whispered, his voice breaking. "Mum, what happened? Why are you in here?" Helen looked at him, and in her eyes was so much pain, so much shame, that Michael felt his heart shatter. "Michael," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. "She brought me here. She said it was temporary, but it's not. She's been mistreating me. Son, please believe me." Michael knelt beside the wheelchair, his hands trembling as he touched his mother's face. "Who? Olivia? Mom, that doesn't make any sense. Olivia said you were in your room, resting." The door opened behind him, and Olivia walked in with a carefully rehearsed expression of surprise. "Michael, you're home early. I was just coming to check on Miss Helen." Michael stood up slowly, turning to his wife. His voice was low, controlled, but there was steel in it. "What is going on here, Olivia? Why is my mother in this room? Why is she in this state?" Olivia sighed, putting on a weary expression. "Michael, I didn't want to worry you. Your mother has been getting much worse. The mental confusion, the aggressive episodes. The doctor suggested she stay in a more controlled environment until her appointment with the geriatrician. It's for her own safety." "Lies!" Helen cried out with all the strength she had left. "She's lying, Michael. She took me out of my room, locked me in here, starves me, humiliates me. Please, son, believe me." Michael looked from his mother to his wife, his mind racing. Aggressiveness? A controlled environment? He looked around. The miserable room at his mother's deplorable state. None of it lined up with Olivia's explanations. Just then, Rosa appeared in the doorway, her face a mixture of determination and fear. "Mr. Michael," she said, her voice firm despite its tremor. "I need to speak with you. There are things you need to know." Olivia whirled on Rosa, her eyes flashing. "Rosa, this is none of your business. Go back to the kitchen now." But Rosa took a step forward, holding a small notebook. "No, Miss Olivia, no more silence. Mr. Michael, for the past few months I've been watching and writing everything down. How Ms. Olivia changed completely after you married her. How she mistreats your mother when you're not here. How she isolated her, cut back her food, humiliated her. I have dates, times, everything written down here." She held the notebook out to Michael, who took it with trembling hands. As he flipped through the pages, reading Rosa's meticulous records, the truth began to piece itself together in his mind like a gruesome puzzle. The dates coincided with his trips. The observations were detailed, specific, impossible to invent. Olivia tried one last gambit. "Michael, are you going to believe a resentful housekeeper over me, your wife? She's probably just jealous, trying to cause trouble between us." But Michael wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at his mother, truly seeing her for the first time in months. The drastic weight loss, the deep dark circles under her eyes, the look of fear in her eyes. How had he not noticed before? How had he been so blind? "Get out of this house," he said to Olivia, his voice low but charged with a contained fury. "Now." Olivia blinked, stunned. What? Michael, you can't be serious. I have never been more serious in my life. I want you out of this house in 1 hour, and you can be sure this isn't over. I'm calling my lawyers. I'm going to the police. You are going to answer for what you've done. Olivia's face transformed then. The mask of sweetness fell away completely, revealing the person she truly was. Her eyes grew hard, her mouth twisted into a sneer of hatred. You're a fool, Michael. I could have had everything. Your fortune, your company, everything. But you had to have this useless old woman getting in the way. The words were like poison, confirming all his worst fears. Michael took a step toward her and she backed away. Get out, he repeated. Before I do something I might regret. Olivia looked at Helen one last time, and there was so much hatred in that gaze it made everyone flinch. Then she turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking down the hallway. When the sound of her footsteps faded, Michael fell to his knees beside his mother's wheelchair and wept. He cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. Mom, forgive me, for not seeing, for not believing, for letting this happen. Helen placed her trembling hands on her son's face, wiping away his tears. You're here now, she whispered. That's what matters. Rosa was crying too, relief mixed with the accumulated pain of weeks of forced silence. Mr. Michael, we need to get Miss Helen out of here. Take her to a real doctor. She needs care. Michael nodded, wiping his face and trying to compose himself. You're right. I'm calling the hospital right now. And Rosa, thank you. If it weren't for you, I never would have known. You saved my mother. I couldn't stay quiet, sir. Not after everything I saw. Miss Helen has always been good to me. She's my family. That night, as they waited for the ambulance that would take Helen to be properly examined, the three of them stayed together in that room that had been a prison. And there, amidst the darkness and suffering, there was also hope. Because the truth had finally come to light, and with it, the chance to start over, to heal, to rebuild what had been broken. Olivia left the mansion that night, but her shadow would linger for a long time. The healing process, both physical and emotional, would be long and difficult, but at least now Helen, Michael and Rosa would face it together, as a real family. United not just by blood, but by overcome adversity and a love that had survived the worst possible test. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes after Michael's call, bringing a medical team that immediately began to assess Helen. Michael watched with a heavy heart, following the paramedics' every move, listening to every technical term they exchanged. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, possible bed sores from lack of proper mobility. Each diagnosis was a knife in his chest, a reminder of his failure as a son. Rosa stayed by Helen's side throughout the process, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. Everything's going to be okay now, Ms. Helen. We're going to take care of you. You'll never go through this again. And Helen believed her, because for the first time in months she wasn't alone in her fight. The hospital they chose was New York Presbyterian, one of the best in the city. Michael would spare no expense or resource to ensure his mother received the best possible treatment. During the ambulance ride, he held her hand, repeatedly asking for forgiveness, promising he would never again be so blind, so absent, so negligent. Son, Helen said, her voice weak but firm, it's not your fault. She fooled us all. That's what she does. She deceives, manipulates. But it's over now. We need to move forward. The first few days in the hospital were intense. Helen underwent a battery of tests, consultations with specialists, and treatments to reverse the damage caused by months of neglect. Michael never left her side, setting himself up in an adjacent room, cancelling all his meetings, delegating responsibilities at his company. For the first time in years, his business took a back seat. His mother was the absolute priority. Rosa visited daily, bringing homemade food when the doctors allowed it, sharing news from the house, keeping Helen connected to the outside world. The relationship between the two women, which had always been one of mutual respect, deepened into something stronger. They had faced evil together, had witnessed each other's courage, and that had forged an unbreakable bond. While Helen recovered physically, Michael dealt with the legal matters. His lawyers filed for divorce immediately, in addition to filing a formal complaint against Olivia for a series of issues related to Helen's mistreatment. The process would be long and complex, but Michael was determined to ensure Olivia answered for her actions. Olivia, for her part, did not disappear quietly. She tried to counterattack, spreading stories about Helen being a problematic mother-in-law, about Michael being a controlling husband, about being the victim of a conspiracy. But the evidence was overwhelming. Rosa's records, Helen's medical exams, the testimony of other household staff who had witnessed changes in Olivia's behavior. The truth was undeniable. 3 weeks after being admitted, Helen was discharged from the hospital. She was still frail and would need ongoing care, but the doctors stated that with proper attention and time, she would recover. The return to the Upper East Side mansion was emotional. Michael had made sure to prepare everything himself. The horrible room where Helen had been kept was completely renovated, transformed into something useful and welcoming. Her old room, her real room, was restored to exactly how it was before, with a few improvements to make it even more comfortable and accessible. When they walked through the front door, Rosa was waiting in the living room with a radiant smile. "Welcome back home, Miss Helen, for real this time." Helen looked around at the walls that had once been her prison, but were now her home again. Tears rolled down her face, but they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a new beginning. "Thank you, Rosa. Thank you for not giving up on me." "I would never give up on you," Rosa replied, hugging her carefully. The first few months were about adjustment and rebuilding. Michael made drastic changes in his life. He promoted competent managers to positions of greater responsibility in his companies, drastically reduced his travel, and implemented a system that allowed him to work from home most of the time. He had realized in the most painful way possible that professional success without family presence was empty and meaningless. He and Helen established new routines. They had breakfast together every morning, talking about everything and nothing, making up for lost time. In the afternoons, when the weather was nice, Michael would take Helen for walks in the garden, sometimes reading to her, sometimes just sitting in silence, enjoying each other's company. At night, they had dinner together, sharing the day's experiences. Rosa also flourished in this new environment. Without the weight of fear and helplessness she had carried for months, she returned to being the cheerful, motherly woman she had always been. Michael, recognizing her loyalty and courage, significantly increased her salary and established an educational fund for her children, not as payment for what she had done, but because it was the right thing to do, because she was family. Helen, for her part, embarked on a healing journey that went beyond the physical. She started therapy, working through the trauma she had lived, processing the feelings of betrayal, fear, and vulnerability. It was difficult, sometimes painful work, but necessary. She discovered there was strength in acknowledging her fragility, that asking for help was not weakness, that surviving wasn't enough when you could truly live. Over time, Helen began to feel she wanted to do something meaningful with her experience. She didn't want her suffering to be in vain. That's how the idea of working with other vulnerable people was born. Michael helped her get in touch with a senior support center in the Bronx, a place that offered assistance to people who had suffered abandonment, neglect, or other forms of mistreatment. Helen started by visiting the center weekly, sharing her story with small groups. At first it was hard to relive those moments, but she found there was power in turning her pain into something constructive. People listened, related, and found hope in her recovery. If she could overcome it, so could they. Over time, Helen's involvement with the center grew. She not only shared her story, but also offered practical support. She helped organize events, raise funds, and train volunteers. She discovered a renewed purpose, a reason to wake up every morning that went beyond her own recovery. Rosa, inspired by Helen's strength, also decided to make a change in her life. She had always dreamed of being a nurse, a dream abandoned decades ago due to circumstances and responsibilities. Michael, upon learning this, offered to sponsor her education. Initially, Rosa refused, saying she was too old, that she had too many responsibilities. But Helen convinced her that it's never too late to chase your dreams, that she deserved to invest in herself. So, at 53, Rosa enrolled in an LPN program. She studied at night after her duties at the house and on weekends. It was tiring, challenging, but also deeply rewarding. She discovered she had a talent for medical care, that her decades of experience caring for Helen had given her a solid foundation of practical knowledge that she now supplemented with theory. Michael, watching the transformations in his mother and Rosa, also went on his own journey. He started therapy to process his guilt, to understand how he had been so easily manipulated, to learn to recognize signs of manipulation in the future. He learned about his own vulnerabilities, about how his desire to see his mother happy had blinded him to reality, about how his absence had created the perfect environment for Olivia to act. The divorce was finalized 6 months after the truth came out. Olivia received no significant financial settlement due to the brevity of the marriage and the circumstances of their separation. She tried to appeal, but the courts were clear. The evidence against her was conclusive. Eventually she left New York, and rumors said she had moved to Miami, but Michael didn't care. She was the past, and he was focused on the present and the future. A year after that fateful night when the truth was revealed, the mansion on the Upper East Side was a completely transformed place, not in its physical structure, but in its essence. Where there was once the appearance of perfection masking rot, there was now authenticity, even when imperfect. Where there were silences heavy with secrets, there were now open and honest conversations. Where there was isolation, there was now community. Helen, who had regained almost all her lost weight and much of her vitality, was sitting in the garden on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Around her were not only Michael and Rosa, but also Rosa's children who had come for a family lunch. There was laughter, lively conversation, the smell of delicious food coming from the grill that Michael had insisted on manning himself. Rosa, who now divided her time between working at the house and her nursing studies, was radiant. She shared funny stories from her classes, imitating professors, complaining about difficult exams, but her eyes shone with a light that wasn't there before. It was the light of someone fulfilling long dormant dreams. Michael, serving drinks to everyone, stopped beside his mother's wheelchair. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he asked, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Helen looked around at the scene of a genuine family of real joy, of love without masks. "I'm happy, son, truly happy. And you know, after everything we've been through, we've learned something important." "What's that, Mom?" "That perfection is a dangerous illusion, that scars aren't signs of weakness, but of survival. That family isn't just about blood ties, but about who stands by you in the storms. And that there is always, always hope for a new beginning." Michael knelt beside her, taking her hand. "You taught me that, Mom. Your strength, your ability to forgive, to move on. You're the strongest person I know." Helen smiled, squeezing her son's hand. "We are strong, Michael, all of us. Me, you, Rosa. And we're stronger together." As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Helen reflected on everything they had been through. The betrayal, the suffering, the fear, but also the discovery, the justice, the healing. It was a story with dark chapters, but it was now being rewritten with light. She thought about Olivia sometimes, not with hatred, though the anger still existed somewhere deep inside, but mostly with a kind of pity. Olivia had lost everything in her pursuit of wealth and power. She lost the chance to be part of a real family, to know genuine love, to build something meaningful. She had chosen the mask over authenticity, and in the end, she was left with nothing. Helen, on the other hand, despite everything she had temporarily lost, had gained so much more back. She had gained the constant presence of her son. She had gained a deep and true friendship with Rosa. She had gained a renewed purpose through her volunteer work. She had gained the certainty that she was stronger than she ever imagined. A few months later, in a simple but emotional ceremony, Rosa received her LPN certificate. Helen and Michael were in the front row, applauding enthusiastically as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. Michael had offered to help her find a job at a prestigious hospital, but Rosa chose a different path. "I want to work at the center where Ms. Helen volunteers," she had announced. "Those people need not only medical care, but someone who understands what they're going through. And I understand. I lived it alongside Ms. Helen." And that's what she did. Rosa became part of the team at the Senior Support Center, bringing not only her technical skills, but also her empathy, her experience, her ability to see beyond physical symptoms to the emotional pain that so often accompanied situations of vulnerability. Helen continued her volunteer work with renewed vigor. She became a well-known figure at the center, the lady in the wheelchair, who always had a word of encouragement, a story of hope, a warm hug. Many people who came through the center said that talking to Helen was transformative, that she made them believe it was possible to rebuild after disaster. Michael, seeing the impact of his mother's work, decided to do more. He established a foundation in Helen's name, dedicated to supporting senior assistance centers for vulnerable populations throughout the state of New York. The foundation offered financial resources, professional training, visitation programs, all designed to ensure that no senior would have to suffer in silence as Helen had. At a launch ceremony for the foundation, Helen was invited to speak. She took the stage in her wheelchair, looked out at the audience of healthcare professionals, social workers, volunteers, and community members, and shared her story. She spared no details. She spoke of the manipulation, the isolation, the fear. But she also spoke of Rosa's courage, of Michael's love, of her own resilience. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Some people came to speak with her afterward, sharing their own stories, expressing gratitude for her courage in speaking out. Helen realized her story was not unique, that there were countless other Helens out there, and that by sharing her experience, she was giving a voice to them as well. The years passed, and life in the Upper East Side mansion settled into a comfortable, meaningful rhythm. It wasn't perfect because perfection, as Helen had learned, was an illusion. There were difficult days, moments when memories of the past returned and brought pain. There were occasional arguments, the normal frustrations of living together, but there was also love, respect, open communication, and a solid foundation of rebuilt trust. Michael eventually started dating again, but this time with his feet on the ground and his eyes wide open. He was cautious, took things slowly, and always included Helen in the process. No surprises, no rash decisions. And Helen, in turn, supported him without pressure, offered her opinion when asked, but respected her son's choices. Rosa formed her own family in the broadest sense of the word. Her children thrived thanks to the educational support they received. The oldest graduated with a degree in engineering, the middle child in business, and the youngest was studying medicine. They visited regularly, treated Helen like a grandmother, and called Michael Uncle Michael. The house was always full of life, of voices, of love. On one particularly significant afternoon, 3 years after the truth was discovered, Helen was sitting in the garden with a group of visitors from the support center. She had invited them to see the house, to show them that recovery was possible, that a home could be transformed from a prison into a sanctuary. As she shared her story once more, she realized she no longer felt pain when talking about the past. She only felt a sense of fulfilled purpose, of trauma transformed into a tool for help. One of the visitors, a woman named Beatrice, who had recently come out of a similar situation, held Helen's hand and said with tears in her eyes, "Thank you for showing me that it's possible to survive, that it's possible not just to live, but to live well after something like this." Helen squeezed her hand back. "Not only is it possible, my dear, it's your right. You deserve safety, dignity, and love. Never forget that." As the sun set that afternoon, painting the garden in golden hues, Helen reflected on the journey she had traveled, from victim to survivor to advocate, from isolated to connected to a catalyst for connection in others, from broken to healed to a healer of others. It hadn't been an easy journey, and the scars would remain forever, but those scars now told a story of strength, not weakness, a story of victory, not defeat. Michael joined her in the garden after the visitors left. He sat on the grass beside her wheelchair, something he did often, preferring to be on her level rather than above her. "Mom," he said softly, "I was thinking. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for what you did for me." Helen frowned, confused. "What did I do for you? You were the one who saved me." Michael shook his head. "No, Mum. You saved me. You saved me from a life of superficiality. You taught me through your experience what really matters. You showed me that strength isn't about power or money, but about character. You gave me a second chance to be the son you always deserved." Helen leaned over and kissed his forehead. "We saved each other, my son. And we keep saving each other every day. That's what family does." As night fell over the Upper East Side, over the mansion that had once been the stage for so much darkness, but now radiated light, Helen knew they had arrived at something precious, not the perfection that had initially seemed to inhabit those walls, but something far more valuable: authenticity, resilience, love tested and proven genuine, and the absolute certainty that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as family, as survivors, as victors. The story of Helen, Michael, and Rosa became known in the New York community, not for the sensational details, but for the message of hope it carried. Local papers wrote about the foundation. Radio shows invited Helen for interviews, and always she used these platforms not to talk about her pain, but about her healing. Not about Olivia, but about Rosa. Not about betrayal, but about loyalty. Not about the evil that exists in the world, but about the good that can overcome it. And so, the mansion on the Upper East Side remained, no longer a monument to perfect appearances, but a testament to authentic imperfection. A place where scars were honored, where vulnerability was strength, where family was defined not by blood or law, but by love demonstrated in action. A place where the shadow of perfection had been replaced by the light of truth. And that light shone not only for those who lived within its walls, but for all who came seeking hope, proof that it is possible to rebuild, to recover, and to triumph over even the darkest of circumstances.